Can Lars Nootbaar work his magic and make Yoshinobu Yamamoto a Cardinal? And is there a worst-case scenario for this offseason that involves Shohei Ohtani to the Cubs? That's coming up on B Shafe Daily. What's going on, everybody, and welcome in to this edition of B Shafe Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you. It is Friday, November 17th, 2023. Finally sitting down to record this at about noon on Friday, so I apologize for the delay. I know most people, longtime listeners of the show, followers on YouTube, are accustomed to having these episodes pop up overnight. But this past week, I've been trying something different, trying to record in the morning, which is a little better for my sleep schedule, especially in the offseason when there's not games to recap from the night before. A little less time sensitive. If you hate that, I apologize. Give me your feedback, though, as always, in the YouTube comments section below, as I try to just honestly find a way to make these episodes happen, because I know that you guys have given me incredible feedback on enjoying the offseason content. Sometimes if I don't get it done in a certain window, it's not going to get done at all during that day. So I appreciate you guys bearing with me. And hopefully today's topic of conversation is not super time sensitive. The Cardinals do have some decisions to make on Friday because it's the non-tender deadline. They've got to tender contracts to a number of players that we've talked about this week, like Dakota Hudson, like Jake Woodford, like Andrew Kisner, like Tyler O'Neill, Ryan Helsley in that group, Jojo Romero in that group. I think for some of those names, it's not even going to be a question. Tommy Edman, for instance, like we haven't talked about all of those names because a lot of them are a foregone conclusion that those guys are getting tendered contracts today. But some of them may not be, and we're not going to talk about that at all in this episode because by the time you listen to it, we may know the answer. We may get the announcement. So we're going to go with an alternative topic today and take a dive into some of the recruiting angles on Lars Nootbaar and Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Is there something there? And is it enough that Lars Nootbaar could maybe convince Yoshinobu Yamamoto to sign with the Cardinals? We know they need a starting pitcher, but is there enough traction there with that relationship to maybe get the Cardinals a little bit of a discount or at least get a seat at the table, right? Because we know that Yamamoto is rumored to be heading to any number of big market teams, and the Cardinals are not usually on those lists. So we'll kind of recap that a little bit, but spend maybe even more time talking about the possibility of Shohei Ohtani to the Cubs. And I know that is an unpleasant thought, but if you look at the moves the Cubs have made so far this offseason, when it comes to luring Craig Counsell to be their field manager on a huge contract relative to what managers are typically paid, Craig Counsell got the bag. Are the Cubs ready to become a force again when it comes to spending money and kind of throw their weight around a little bit in the NL Central? Well, there'd be no better way to do that this offseason than inking Shohei Ohtani to a long-term contract, and that would be the doomsday scenario, Cardinals fans. I'll talk about what I think of the likelihood that that could happen, and the Cubs could land the biggest free agent in this offseason class. So we're going to jump right into the content of the show as we always are trying to do these days. I say this every time because I want to make a habit of doing it. So quick reminder to subscribe to the channel on YouTube, youtube.com/@bshafer12, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts as well. You can subscribe by searching B Shafe Daily on those platforms. So let's start here, getting into the discussion on Lars Nootbaar and Yoshinobu Yamamoto, the Japanese pitcher who I don't actually believe has been posted yet by his team in Japan, the Oryx Buffaloes. I don't think he's been posted, and when he gets posted, it's 45 days that he'll have to make a decision within, but I feel like that's going to come pretty quickly once he's posted. It looks like the recent top stories suggest that any day now he's going to be posted, which means he can begin negotiating with MLB teams. And we know that there's going to be the posting fee associated heading back to his Oryx Buffaloes team that he's been pitching for as part of the process for him to join Major League Baseball. But the big guns of MLB, the Mets, the Yankees, the Dodgers, there's going to be some big teams that are certainly going to be in on him. The Rangers has been a place that's been mentioned as a possibility with the way that they've thrown money around in recent years. He's a 25-year-old ace is essentially what Yamamoto is expected to be when he heads stateside and joins a Major League Baseball organization. Obviously, folks in America probably don't have as much familiarity with his game as we do major league players because we haven't really seen him play, but we've heard the stories and we can see the numbers. The ERAs below 2 each of the last 3 seasons for Yamamoto in Japan, pitching in the Nippon Professional Baseball League. 2021, he had a 1.39 ERA as a 22-year-old. He's doing that at 22 years old in a league that I would describe as being kind of a step between AAA and in the majors in Major League Baseball. That's maybe not entirely accurate, and it may vary from year to year as to the talent level, but it's good baseball over there. And he's got a 1.39 ERA in 2021 as a 22-year-old pitcher. Then in 2022, he had an ERA of 1.68. And then this past season, he was marvelous with a 1.16 ERA in 24 games, 171 innings, struck out 176 batters. The previous 2 seasons, he was around 193 innings with over 200 strikeouts, so more than a strikeout per inning. How well that specific part of his game translates, I guess, remains to be seen. But in terms of run prevention, just some incredible stuff. And honestly, this is something that I'm interested to look into as well. I hadn't done this before, so I'm going to do it on the fly. But when the New York Mets signed Kodai Senga out of Japan, and he ended up finishing second in the Rookie of the Year vote, all of those awards have been revealed. The BBWA awards have been revealed over the course of this past week. Rookie of the Year was revealed a couple of days ago. I did actually have one of the votes for Rookie of the Year, and I can tell you now, because it's been revealed publicly, if you go to the BBWA website, you'll see all the voting results for all of the major awards that have been unveiled over the past week. Ben Fredrickson of the Post-Dispatch and myself were the 2 from our chapter that in St. Louis that got to vote on this specific award this year. We actually had an identical ballot. I had Corbin Carroll as Rookie of the Year, as did most people. He ran away with the award, but Kodai Senga was my number 2. You vote for 3 spots, and Senga for me was the second most impressive rookie, despite the fact that some people would say, well, is he really a rookie because he's pitched professionally for so many years? He's 30 years old and had been pitching in Japan at their highest level for so long. But he's a rookie to Major League Baseball, and so he qualifies just as same as anybody else would, and was certainly deserving, had a fantastic season, and Major League Baseball became accustomed and familiar with Kodai Senga's ridiculous fork ball they call the ghost fork, and he struck out 202 batters in 166 innings for the Mets this season. But what I'm interested in kind of comparing relative to what we could expect from Yamamoto strikeout-wise, I want to see what Senga's strikeout numbers were when he was pitching in Japan before coming over. Because the 200 strikeouts in 160 innings, that is exactly the kind of stuff the Cardinals would be looking for this offseason. But I'm curious if Senga had that same level of strikeout success in Japan, because that is a league that is much more known for contact-oriented play, right? In Major League Baseball, we're talking about launch angles and just shooting for the moon, and it's home run or bust, and if you strike out, it's no big deal. That's not the style of play in Japan. We know that to be the case. And so I'm kind of curious what Senga's numbers were. So I'll take a look at that here as I pulled them up. And it is kind of as I expected it to be, where his strikeout numbers in Japan weren't anything ridiculous necessarily. Just they don't pop off the page like his numbers for the Mets did this last season. In 2022, Senga had 144 innings, 156 strikeouts. In 2021, pitching in the same league as Yamamoto, we're talking about, 111 innings, 116 strikeouts. So he was kind of in that similar tier. 2020, 2019, he had some more impressive strikeout numbers, it looks like, with 227 Ks and 180 innings. In 2020, he had 159 Ks and 131 innings. But the last couple of seasons, before he came over, Kodai Senga, not anything crazy in terms of strikeout rate, still very good, still certainly more than a K per inning, but they kind of mirror what we're seeing from a much younger, much less experienced Yoshinobu Yamamoto over the past couple of seasons in Japan. So this tells me that, with the way that strikeout numbers are a little lower in Japanese baseball, you could see Yamamoto come over and be just an absolute wipeout strikeout guy as well, with the numbers that he's been able to put up in a league where it's maybe not as easy to do that. So I think certainly Yamamoto is going to be an ace, a frontline ace. There's no question in my mind. If the Cardinals really wanted to be bold, this is the move they would make. But we haven't spent as much time talking about it on Be Safe Daily in this YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe if you enjoy our Cardinals content. The reason we haven't spent as much time focusing on him specifically is because of the expectation for the salary. The projections In some places have it being more than $200 million, and that's just for the salary. If you're talking about a 7-year, $210 million deal, and I'm just throwing this out as a possibility so you can have a reference for what it would be, there would then be a posting fee on top of that would be paid to his former team in Japan that would be paid by the major league team that signs him. And the number is, for a contract like that, I'm not going to do the exact math because it's the first $50 million is at a certain percentage, and then the next $50 million is at a certain percentage. Ultimately, I think it would come out to be around $30 million, give or take. Don't focus too much on that number, but it's just going to be something in that neighborhood. So you're talking potentially $240, $250 million total that would be paid to Yamamoto over a 7-ish year contract. And obviously for a shorter deal, that would be a number that would come down more than likely in terms of the total financial outlay versus a longer deal. If he signs an 8-9 year contract right out of the gate, then it would probably be even greater in total sum than $250 million. So Yamamoto's going to get a bag of money. We know the Cardinals have not historically been accustomed to giving those types of contracts out. They've never done it to a free agent, especially a free agent that has not played for the Cardinals previously. You can point to the Matt Holliday deal and say, well, technically they signed his contract, 100 whatever million it was, in free agency. But the biggest free agent contract that they've given to a player that had not previously worn the Cardinal uniform is Wilson Contreras' $87.5 million last offseason. So you would be talking about an absolute massive jump, which is why it's probably unlikely. But my goodness, if Lars Nootbaar doesn't keep getting people's hopes up, and again, he's not doing anything wrong. He's just friends with the guy because they played on the same World Baseball Classic team, and the social media pictures could feed families. With what I mean, in St. Louis, Missouri, people are loving this. Seeing from Yamamoto, who posted on his Instagram a picture of him playing golf with Lars Nootbaar. I think this was like yesterday that this happened. And previously, we know that Lars was over in Japan to see him pitch in the Japan League World Series, I believe it was. And there's an article from John Denton, MLB.com, where Nootbaar talks a little bit about the trip. And I'll just read you some quotes from Noot from this article. Check it out. JD does a great job for MLB.com. Quote, "I want to help Yoshi in any way that I can," Nootbaar said after recently returning from a trip that involved autograph signings, speaking engagements, and meetings regarding potential advertising opportunities. That's right, Lars. You get your bag too, buddy. I mean, it's this guy should be on every single commercial in Japan, the way that he's such a star. So, Lars going over there for a little business, which certainly should be. But Lars continues, quote, "I don't know about the legality of it. I don't want to step on any toes. But if Yamamoto or any of the other guys have questions, I want to be here to help." It's just the kind of guy that Lars Nootbaar is. Lars adds, quote, "My mom talks to Yamamoto's mom daily. I went and saw him throw in his first playoff game. I sat with his mom at the game. We chatted a little bit. But there wasn't anything I could tell her that she didn't already know because my mom had already filled her in about Nootbaar playing for the Cardinals. Yoshi and Roki Sasaki, and Sasaki is an even younger Japanese pitcher who was the guy throwing like 103 in the World Baseball Classic. He should get posted eventually. He said that the flamethrower and the young kid, our moms all talk daily," Lars says. "I have a great relationship with both of those guys. Now that Yoshi's coming over to MLB, I've been talking to him a little bit more, and I plan on seeing him again later in the offseason," which it seems as though that's what is happening with the golf outing, unless that's an old picture, which it could certainly be. Yoshi just posting it on Instagram November 16th, but could certainly be an older picture from the trip that they had a couple of weeks ago. But nevertheless, man, Yamamoto would be I mean, you think about if the Cardinals just wanted to be bold and say we need to find a new strategy. You're worried about Bally Sports Midwest going under and what the TV rights and things like that are going to be. You want to sell some tickets, man. People from Japan support their baseball players, and you could become the national team of Japan if you really wanted to. You could sign Yoshinobu Yamamoto. You could wait for Roki Sasaki to come. He's going to get a bag of money. That's probably a few years down the line because I think there's a number of years that they would be obligated to pitch in Japan before they're eligible, before they have veteran status to be posted to Major League Baseball once they've signed a contract with a team in the Nippon Professional Baseball League. Sasaki down the line. But, I mean, even Shota Imanaga is another Japanese player that is being posted, a pitcher. I mean, you could have two-fifths of your rotation be some of the best pitchers from Japan, and you're going to have an entire country supporting St. Louis Cardinals baseball at that point. I'm not saying, like, the branding opportunities are such that it would completely change the Cardinals' ability and their comfort level with having a higher payroll. But wouldn't it be like a really creative way to go about it and say, don't you think you could have some additional opportunities because of this? You already have Lars Nootbaar on the team. Obviously Ohtani, if you were to sign him, would be the obvious name that, would be a huge boon for your support over in Japan. But you've already got Lars Nootbaar, and he's young, cost control. You can have him for a few years before you got to worry about extending him. I would sign the best player Japan has to offer that is not going to be a $500 million deal like Ohtani, which, again, sign him. But we haven't even wasted any time talking about that because it just doesn't seem like it's in the Cardinal way to sign a contract that big. But what I love about Yamamoto is he's only 25 years old. So with all the contracts that the Cardinals have tried to do, like the Stanton contract that didn't work out because he didn't want to play here, like the David Price contract that didn't work out because the Red Sox swooped in at the last minute and offered more money and said, you got to decide today. And so he did. Those were opportunities that the Cardinals sought that would have meant spending this kind of Yamamoto money, but it just didn't end up happening. And those were blessings in disguise because those were older players that have since broken down health-wise. Yamamoto is in the prime of his career at 25. If you're going to ever do it for that type of player. Like, do it for the Bryce Harper player who reached free agency at 27 years old. The Cardinals didn't want to do it then. I feel like this would be such a no-brainer. Like you might ask, Brenden, we're talking about this a lot. Is it possible that Bill DeWitt would greenlight a contract of this size? Is it possible? Yes, I think it is. Is it probable? No, based on precedents. But also the Cardinals and the way they move, they do it in silence. When they have something big cooking, you don't know about it until it's happened. And that has always been the way that they have worked. And man, have the Cardinals been pretty silent this offseason so far, right? So I'm not saying that's a signal that something big is on the way. But when something big historically has happened, the Arenado trade, John Mozeliak spent all offseason prior to making that deal talking about Matt Carpenter being the third baseman and how they're going to roll with that. That was not ever going to be the case. They were going to get Arenado. That was the plan. We just didn't know it yet. Paul Goldschmidt trade. There really weren't a lot of rumblings. I'm proud that that offseason wrote a trade. I was doing Trade Poll Tuesday articles. I was tweeting out the polls on Twitter, writing the articles for KMOV, and I believe I had a Paul Goldschmidt trade mocked up that Carson Kelly was involved in. I didn't nail the exact package, but I got part of it correct. You just don't generally know that these things are coming. Do we like seeing Lars Nootbaar hanging out with Yamamoto? Absolutely. I don't think it could hurt, right? But is it one of those deals that it's enough to make the difference? Probably not, right? Like Yoshinobu Yamamoto's got other friends too. Even if Lars Nootbaar is his best friend, he's got other friends. But it's inspiring Cardinals Twitter. A lot of memes. I saw a meme created by Hayden. What's his account? STL Sports Page, I believe it's called. What's it called? STL Sports Central. Yeah, I think the STL Sports Central account created the meme of Yoshi and Lars standing outside Emo's Pizza. That's the kind of stuff we like to see on social media. So, look, do I think it's likely? No, I don't. Do I think it's totally impossible? No, because we know the Cardinals need starting pitching, and they're talking a lot about the volume of innings and how they need to, be prudent. There's a slim part of me that wonders if John Mozeliak is going extra hard into that language of we got to be prudent, we got to be smart because one thing, it helps to manage expectations after he said in August 3 starters and everybody got their expectations up because he put them there. And then you kind of see, okay, we're dialing things back. But there's a part of me that wonders if the Cardinals internally know, like, we have to land a big fish and we're going to. We're not going to take no for an answer. We're just going to offer more money. If it's Yamamoto, great. If it's Blake Snell, great. If it's Aaron Nola, then it is. But we're going to get one of these guys. We know this. Major League Baseball doesn't know it yet, and there's no reason to tell them. I wonder if that's maybe, again, a slim part of my brain is wondering this. The majority of my brain thinks the Cardinals, it's a show me state here in Missouri. Until we see it, it's hard to believe that something is going to actually be different than it's been before. They said, though, all of August and September that they know it has to be different. And so I wonder if that was the truth, if the words they spoke at the time were how they actually feel. And now we're getting more of a PR version of that where they don't want to tip their hand. What do you think, Cardinals fans? Do you have some faith that something big could be coming? Could that big thing be Yoshinobu Yamamoto? If you asked me to put a percentage on it, it would be a low number. But if you asked me to put a percentage on, will the Cardinals get one of Yamamoto, Aaron Nola, Blake Snell? I don't know. I might be closer to midfield on that. Like 35 to 40% that they get one of those guys. And then the majority likelihood is something in the neighborhood of Sonny Gray, who I've said all offseason is the likeliest answer to me in terms of a big free agent signing by the Cardinals. But it's possible that they say, look, we know we heard B. Schaeffer Daily. No, they don't listen. But we understand the things that Brenden was talking about yesterday, which is, hey, your defense took a dive, and you had that combined with a really low strikeout rate. If you're going to move forward with a similar roster offensively and in the field, which it doesn't have to be a bad defensive team. I think it can improve just by the players playing better than they played last year. A lot of times to expect older veteran players to suddenly turn back the clock and be better is maybe not a great bet to make. But I think in this case, you saw Arenado do it. And he's not an older player. He's still in his prime. You might say Paul Goldschmidt has lost a step. I don't even know if that's true. I know his age might suggest that he has in his numbers offensively and his numbers even defensively last year. But again, I think part of it could be, we talked about how many games can you just add to your win total based off of vibes because the vibes were bad. And if you improve the vibes, do you win more? Got a good comment from Bo on yesterday's YouTube video. Regardless of who the Cardinals end up getting, do you think or believe that if the Cardinals win more than the 10 games they won in April and the 15 in May, like last season, that it'll help guys across the roster like Michaelis, Matz, Thompson, Liberatore, all these guys perform better and more consistently because there will be less pressure to play catch-up versus being 10-19 like the Cardinals were at the end of April? And I said, my response, I responded to Bo and said, I believe that. And it's a good point because starting slow, it digs a hole that's really hard to mentally escape. And a bad week turns into a bad month, turns into a bad half of a summer, and the next thing you know, the season got away from you, and it's over. That's what happened to the Cardinals. Like, there's a lot of stuff that does need to change, but one simple thing changing is just like starting better so they don't dig themselves a hole where that then wears on a roster of players who played worse than they are last year because of the circumstances of their season. That can't fix everything. You can't rely upon that. John Mozeliak can't let that be his stump speech at winter warm-up. Like, he needs to make moves. But I also think you could get better just because the players you have, they're not terrible, but they got behind the eight ball and they never could find their way out of it. So that could be an aspect of this as well. And I mention it in the context of talking about Paul Goldschmidt because I think his defensive metrics declined, his offensive numbers declined. He was the MVP of the National League in 2022 and didn't get a single vote. And on the MVP ballot, you list 10 guys. So not even one writer thought, yeah, he's top 10 in the National League after winning the award. And it's not like he's missed the year with injury. He played. It's just he had a bad season by his standards. But I think the Cardinals had a bad season by their standards. And if they have a better season, I think it can come from Paul Goldschmidt, in part, doing his part and doing what he's more accustomed to doing. I think mentally the season wore on everybody. It's not just Goldschmidt, not to single him out, not to single any one of the players out, but we all saw what happened last year. So we'll see whether the Cardinals can be aggressive in trying to fix it. We'll see whether Yamamoto might be a part of that plan. Yes, I think they should pursue him. I think if it's 7 and 210, I would do it. Even with the $30 million or whatever that posting fee ends up being, I would do that if I'm the St. Louis Cardinals. Will that be the number? Will they be outbid? And will they be aggressive and actually try to secretly go for this? And we won't really know the extent of it because somebody signs him to an even bigger deal. We'll have to see. But again, it cannot hurt to have Lars Nootbaar in the mix. I still lean, if you put my feet to the fire, that they're more inclined to do something from that second tier, like a Sonny Gray, in terms of the big signing, rather than go for Yamamoto because they want to spread their money around a little better. But if I'm talking about volume and being prudent is just a smokescreen, what an offseason it could be. Let's, though, talk about the possibility that this offseason is a dreadful one when we look back on it for the St. Louis Cardinals, because if it signals the beginning of the dominance of the Chicago Cubs in the NL Central because they go out and sign Shohei Ohtani to a massive contract, that'd be bad news in St. Louis. And I actually think it's possible that the Cubs would look to sign Ohtani. First of all, we'll read from an article on ESPN written by Jesse Rogers, who's a former Cubs beat writer, now a staff writer for the ESPN, covers the NL Central, but obviously still plugged in with what's going on in Chicago. I think he's still based in Chicago. And so he wrote this article titled Cubs Eyeing Second Chance to Sign Shohei Ohtani. This is from yesterday, Thursday, November 16th, and basically talks in the beginning of the article about how it was very clear when the Cubs had a meeting with Ohtani back in 2017 when he came over to Major League Baseball. They wanted him. He liked Chicago. The problem was the NL did not have a designated hitter at the time, and he wanted to do both. He wanted to be the guy that hit and pitched, and in order to do that, he basically had to go to American League team at the time. Jed Hoyer said, as good as the meeting went with him, we always knew it was going to be an uphill climb because he would not have been able to DH with Chicago. They thought he was intrigued, though, and obviously the Cubs were too. The Cubs were one of 7 finalists for Ohtani back then, one of 2 that weren't located on the West Coast. The implication being that West Coast was probably a preference for Ohtani at the time, and so that's what ended up happening. Obviously, he goes to the Angels and becomes the superstar there that he is. We know he's not pitching in 2024, but that probably won't have much of an impact on the contract he signs, honestly. It might lose him a few $1 million, but maybe a few tens of $1 million, but between $450 million versus $500 million, you're still talking about a massive bag of money. And the idea being that pitchers recover from arm surgeries all the time, elbow surgeries to pitch and to pitch again and pitch well. So could he get basically the same big contract with people assuming that down the road he will be able to pitch again? I think that is probably the expectation. And I've talked about maybe if teams weren't so keen on it, we're trying to lowball him relative to what he thought his value should be as a two-way player. Sign a 1-year, $90 million contract. I think a team should offer it. I think the Cardinals should offer it. They're not going to, obviously. They say they've got $60 million in their budget, not $90. But I think the idea being, if you could, on a 1-year deal, get a higher AAV in a year that you don't pitch, but you can integrate into a clubhouse and he wants to win. That's what's most important to Ohtani, is to win. He hasn't gotten to experience that yet with the Angels, so he's going to go somewhere else where he can have an opportunity to do that. Get him in the clubhouse, have him DH for you for the entire year, bat in the middle of your lineup, hopefully help you win, advance to the playoffs, see the fan base, see all the... That would be the allure, right? You'd say, hey, look, what you experienced with the Angels was what it was. Have one winning season with Ohtani where you objectively you overpay for his services just to get him in the building. I think that would be the way to go about it. But if that's not necessary because he's still getting the $500 million, we just don't know it yet, then so be it. I'm wasting my time talking about it. But I do think there could be some fire to this smoke when it comes to the Chicago Cubs potentially making a run at Ohtani. One good line from the Jesse Rogers story on ESPN, quote, Ohtani would own Wrigley Field, literally. One NL scout joked about his potential salary. He'd own Chicago for sure. What do you think, Cardinals fans? Is there a risk of Ohtani going to the Cubs, and what would that mean for the Cardinals' ability to compete? I mean, you look at this article from Fox Sports. There's odds. I don't know where you bet on this, what sportsbook has these odds out, but I'm sure it's somewhere. It's honestly kind of lame of Fox Sports to put this article out if they didn't put which sportsbook lists the odds, because then it's meaningless and it's not real. As someone who writes betting articles about football and basketball, you have to list where the odds are from or nobody can take action on it. Anyway, it does say, though, plus 350 for Ohtani to the Cubs, which is the second most likely odds, the Dodgers being the favorite team. Doesn't always mean anything just because somebody is a betting favorite to do something when it's not a game that we're talking about. It's a who's going to sign whom sort of question. A lot of times those odds, you got to remember, are made to garner wagers because most every bet that is placed is going to lose because if you list a bunch of teams and everybody picks a team that they think is going to be, it's not always going to be that team. So those bets are losing bets, and the casinos and sports books continue to build those big, tall buildings out in Las Vegas. But nevertheless, you're getting articles written about it. You're getting betting odds that suggest it's a possibility. I do see there in the Jesse Rogers article that it would probably mean Cody Bellinger not returning to the Cubs. They aren't likely to sign both. There's a quote in there that says, I think Bellinger is as good as gone, from one source familiar with the situation at the beginning of the offseason. So maybe even if they don't sign Ohtani, the Cubs not bringing back Bellinger. If that's the case, the Cardinals should get Bellinger. I've been saying that for over a year. when he was going to sign that pillow deal last year with somebody. It ended up being the Cubs. I thought Bellinger would be perfect, and he's a left-handed hitter who hits well, hits for power, can get on base, can play good defensive center field. The Cardinals need that. That is the hole in their lineup because they're trying to move a good shortstop, a good infielder to the outfield. He's a league average hitter. Tommy Edman, Brendan Donovan's more your utility guy. You have Lars Nootbaar, but you want to play him in the corners. Cody Bellinger. Unfortunately, the Cardinals put themselves in a position this offseason where they need to prioritize pitching with the money that they spend, so we probably will not see that deal either, but just from building a blueprint of a player that the Cardinals could use, it's the production of Cody Bellinger. Whatever you think about if he's a kind of a goofy guy or would be a good fit, whatever, doesn't matter. I think he'd be great, but I don't think you'll see it because they need to spend their money on pitching. But Ohtani to the Cubs would be a nightmare scenario, I think, for the Cardinals, and I think it's plausible enough that it would take place. You should be rooting for the Dodgers to sign him, Cardinals fans. You should be rooting for the Mets to sign him. You should be rooting for the Yankees to sign him. You should be rooting for one of those big East Coast, West Coast kind of market teams to land Ohtani, because if they don't, it's going to be the Cubs that do it. And if the Cubs do it, they're probably not going to stop there. I mean, that's going to be a big chunk of payroll for sure, but it's going to be a lot easier to recruit players to Chicago if you've got Ohtani there, which is not to say that already they don't have a draw. I mean, Chicago, Wrigley Field, great place to play. Whatever Cardinals fans think about that, I think objectively there's a lot of allure to the big city market that Chicago is, biggest city in the Midwest in terms of market and things like that. Wrigley Field, a historic place to play, good fan base. Again, regardless of what Cardinals fans think, it's true. They still fill Wrigley Field even when the Cubs are bad. So there would be a lot to like for a free agent choosing to play for the Cubs. Add Ohtani there, and the Cubs say, hey, we're going to spend a little bit. We're going to get the team necessary to compete. We can tell the division is kind of down right now. I mean, the Brewers won it last year, and they completely flamed out in the playoffs. And then their manager went to the Cubs. So the Brewers, I mean, they could trade Corbin Burns. The Brewers might not be long tenured at the top of this division if they go the other way and maybe reduce payroll and things like that. So I do feel like the Cubs could sense the opportunity. The Cardinals are down right now. This is a chance to pounce if you're any of these other teams in a position to do it. And I think the Cubs are in a position to do it. So Ohtani would be a big way to make that happen. And it seems to be, kind of reading the tea leaves here of the Jesse Rogers article, that Ohtani is maybe the preference there, and they're not as keen on re-signing Cody Bellinger, which surprises me. I kind of figured he would be re-signed, but Jesse Rogers has a source saying that he's as good as gone. So we'll see what ends up happening there. And again, if he is as good as gone, see if you can jump in if you're the Cardinals. But I think his contract now, like last year was the year to sign him. He was going to be 1 year. It was like $20 million or whatever it was, which you say, well, that's a lot of money for a guy who had been terrible. But he also is a former league MVP, and the Cubs made a savvy signing. I said it at the time. It looks to be the case. He's going to get a big bag of money, and they got good production from him for a year, whether they re-sign him or not. But what do you think, Cardinals fans? Is there a concern for you that Shohei Ohtani would go to the Cubs? I think it is a real possibility. I wouldn't say him signing there is the most likely destination. It's still probably the Dodgers or the Mets. Like that seems to be always where these big name, big talent guys are likely to go because they've got the money to do it. But if the Cubs chose to jump in now, if this was going to be their time to start spending again, there'd be no better way to do it than with Ohtani. And for the Cardinals, I think that would be bad news. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you're worried about it, if you think it's a possibility, and if you're frustrated that it's not the rumors of the Cardinals maybe potentially looking to sign Ohtani. You can let all those thoughts be known in the YouTube comment section below. Make sure you guys hit subscribe on the channel. If you're enjoying the videos, give me a like on each of these videos as you watch them. Helps me out tremendously. Thank you guys so much for the support. We're going to have a shorter video here because it is Friday heading into the weekend. I got some other work I got to get done today. But if you've got other Cardinals topics you want to hear about, let me know that as well. You can send me a direct message on Twitter at bschaeffer12 and let me know how I'm doing, good, bad, or ugly. I appreciate your guys' feedback. We know we're going to have some news to talk about in the days ahead based on what happens here at the non-tender deadline. So stay tuned for that information in the next episode of the podcast here on YouTube or on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on Be Safe Daily. Peace.